The darkness was absolute, suffocating, eternal. Helen Myers lay in a hospital bed, her world reduced to sounds and sensations. The steady beep of monitors, the antiseptic burn in her nostrils, the rough texture of bandages wrapped tight around her eyes. Her fingers trembled against the starched sheets as panic clawed its way up her throat. She'd been awake for 3 minutes. 3 minutes of testing her eyelids, trying to force them open beneath the gauze. 3 minutes of praying this was temporary. Then she heard him breathing, not the shallow, hesitant breathing of a visitor unsure whether to wake a patient. This was controlled, measured, the breathing of a predator lying in wait. "Who's there?" Her voice cracked, smaller than she'd ever heard it. A chair scraped against linoleum. Footsteps, expensive leather on cheap tile, approached her bed. The mattress dipped as he sat beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Bergamot and cedar. She knew that scent, had memorized it during 6 months of cleaning the mansion where she worked. Ettore Orlando, the man whose home she tidied 5 days a week. The man whose whispered phone conversations were always in Italian. The man whose enemies appeared in newspapers with their faces blurred out. Helen. His voice was rough, accented, achingly familiar. "You're awake, Mr. Orlando?" She tried to sit up, but agony lanced through her skull, forcing her back down. "What happened? Why can't I see? Why are you?" "The car that hit you." He cut her off, his tone carefully neutral. "It wasn't an accident. It was meant for me." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Helen's heart hammered against her ribs as the implications crystallized in her mind. She'd been collateral damage in someone's war against the man who paid her $4,000 a month in cash to dust his first edition books and pretend not to notice when men in suits arrived at midnight. "The doctors say—" He paused, and she heard something crack in his voice. "They say the impact damaged your optic nerves. The surgery saved your life, but your sight. Tell me." Her hands fisted in the sheets. "Just tell me. They can't say if it will return." Silence. The monitor beeped. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. Helen felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Not quite breaking, but fracturing, splintering. "I'm blind." "Possibly. They won't know for certain until—" "I'm blind because someone tried to kill you, and I got in the way." Another pause. Then, yes, she should have been furious. Should have screamed at him, blamed him, demanded he leave and never come back. Instead, she felt his hand close around hers, warm, calloused, gentle, and heard him whisper 5 words that would alter the trajectory of everything. "I will be your eyes." Before we continue with Helen's story, can I ask you something? I spend 15 to 20 hours researching, writing, and perfecting each story for you. That's nearly a full week of work to create these cinematic experiences completely free. While you're here enjoying this story, YouTube only shows it to a tiny fraction of people unless you take just 2 seconds to hit subscribe. Here's the thing. If just half of you watching right now subscribe, this channel would explode, and I could create even deeper, more complex stories for you every single week. But only about 3% of viewers are subscribed. That means 97% of you are enjoying hours of content, but haven't taken that tiny step. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for a single click that tells YouTube, show this to more people. So here's my request. If you're enjoying Helen's story so far, click subscribe. It takes 2 seconds and means everything to this channel's survival. Also, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing this global community we're building. Last video, we had viewers from 47 different countries. Now, let's get back to the story, because what happens next changes everything for Helen. 6 months earlier, Helen had been a different person. A woman who took the bus to work, who counted pennies at the grocery store, who understood her place in the world's hierarchy. She'd grown up in Southwest Atlanta, daughter of a housekeeper and a mechanic who died when she was 12. She'd learned early that survival meant making yourself small, quiet, invisible. The one ad had been deceptively simple. Housekeeper needed. Discretion required. Excellent pay. She'd worn her best interview dress, black, modest, professional, and taken 2 buses to reach Buckhead, where the mansions hid behind walls and gates. The Orlando estate had looked like something from a movie. Mediterranean architecture, terracotta roof tiles, gardens so perfect they seemed painted on. Mrs. Williams, the house manager, had studied Helen with eyes like a hawk assessing prey. Steel gray hair pulled back, so tight it looked painful. A mouth that seemed permanently set in disapproval. This woman had seen everything, survived everything, and trusted nothing. You've cleaned before? 5 years with Morrison Estate Services. I have references. Already checked them. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. The older woman had stepped aside. Come in. We'll see if you can handle it. The mansion's interior had stolen Helen's breath. Marble floors stretched out like frozen lakes. A grand staircase curved upward to the second floor, its banister gleaming. Original artwork lined the walls. Not prints, but actual paintings with visible brushstrokes and gilt frames. A Monet in the hallway. What looked like a Caravaggio in the sitting room. Wealth beyond her comprehension. $4,000 a month. Cash. Mrs. Williams had named a figure that made Helen's knees weak. You work Monday through Friday, 7 to 3. You clean. You cook when needed. You maintain absolute discretion about what you see and hear in this house. I understand. Do you? The woman had leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. Mr. Orlando values loyalty above everything else. Men who betray him tend to disappear. Women who talk to the wrong people find themselves without jobs. Or worse, you'll be fine here as long as you remember that. The threat had been clear. Crystal clear. I understand. Helen had repeated, meaning it this time. For the first 3 weeks, Helen had barely seen Eddie Orlando. She'd heard him, his voice carrying from the study, always in Italian, always with an edge that made her pulse quicken. Sometimes the conversations were smooth, almost musical. Other times they were sharp, staccato, dangerous. She'd found evidence of his presence. A coffee cup still warm when she cleaned his desk, a suit jacket draped over a chair that smelled of his cologne, the ghost of cigar smoke in the library. The house itself revealed him in fragments. Philosophy books in his study. Machiavelli, Nietzsche, Anthony Aurelius. Art history texts with passages underlined. Classical music scores annotated in the margins with small, precise notes. This wasn't the monster she'd expected. This was someone who thought, who studied, who engaged with beauty. Then, on a Thursday in late September, he'd walked into the library while she was dusting. You're Helen. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, and her breath had caught. Eddie Orlando was tall, over 6 feet, with dark hair silvering at the temples and eyes so deep brown they appeared black. He wore a 3-piece suit like armor, perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders and lean frame. There was something coiled in the way he held himself. Dangerous, controlled, like a panther deciding whether you were prey or something worth sparing. Yes, sir. She'd clutched the dust cloth like a shield. He'd studied her for a long moment, his gaze traveling over her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Not leering, assessing, like he was cataloging every detail, filing her away in the database of his mind. Mrs. Williams says you're thorough. Quiet. I try to be. Good. He'd moved further into the room, his movements economical, purposeful. He'd pulled a worn book from the shelf. These are important to me. First editions, most of them. Some signed. Handle them carefully. Of course. He'd paused, holding up the book. Do you read, Helen? The question had surprised her. Employers didn't usually care about the interior lives of their staff. When I have time. What do you read? Classics, mostly. Baldwin, Morrison, Hurston. Whatever I can find at the library. Something had shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening. Good authors. Important voices. He'd set the book on the desk between them. James Baldwin. Giovanni's Room. Take it. When you're finished, we'll discuss it. Then he'd left, leaving Helen staring at first edition that probably cost more than her monthly salary, wondering what kind of Mafia boss discussed literature with the help. Over the following weeks, their relationship had developed a strange rhythm. He'd leave books for her, always with a note in his angular handwriting. Try this one. Tell me what you think of the ending. The protagonist reminded me of something you said. She'd read them on her lunch breaks, sitting in the kitchen while Mrs. Williams pretended not to notice and leave her own notes in response. Their actual conversations remained brief, professional, but Helen found herself watching for him, listening for his footsteps, anticipating their 5-minute exchanges about fictional characters and thematic elements. She learned things. He preferred Dostoevsky to Tolstoy. He thought Gatsby was a fool, but understood him. He believed that art was the only honest thing humans created because it required vulnerability. "You're playing with fire," Mrs. Williams had warned one October afternoon. They were in the kitchen. The older woman was showing Helen how Mr. Orlando liked his espresso prepared. "Mr. Orlando doesn't have friends, Helen. He has associates, employees, family. The lines don't blur. We just talk about books." For now, Mrs. Williams had poured the espresso, the crema perfect on top. "I've worked for this family for 30 years. I watched Edery grow from a boy into what he is now. He's a good man, in his way, but he lives in a world that devours good things. Don't let it devour you." But the lines were already blurring. Helen learned how he took his espresso. No sugar, served in a specific white cup with a gold rim. He learned she preferred Earl Grey with honey. These small intimacies felt more dangerous than any conversation. She noticed other things, too. The way his expression softened slightly when he saw she'd finished a book. The afternoon she'd found him playing Chopin on the grand piano, Nocturne in E-flat, and he hadn't stopped when he noticed her in the doorway. He just kept playing, his long fingers moving across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for a man with his reputation. The morning he'd left her a first edition of Their Eyes Were Watching God with a note, "I think you'll appreciate Janie's journey towards self-knowledge." Helen was falling, and she knew it. Falling for a man who lived in shadows, whose phone calls ended in cold silences, whose visitors arrived in cars with tinted windows and left looking either relieved or terrified. December brought the first crack in their careful distance. She'd arrived at 7 a.m. to find the mansion tense, vibrating with barely suppressed violence. Different men at the door, not the usual guards, but harder types with cold eyes and visible shoulder holsters. Mrs. Williams had been pale, drawn, moving through the kitchen with jerky, nervous movements. "Just do your regular work. Stay out of the study and East Wing. Is everything okay? Just do your work, Helen." Helen had tried. She'd cleaned upstairs bedrooms while voices shouted below, switching between English and Italian. The Italian was too fast for her limited knowledge, but she caught words. Tradimento, betrayal, sang, blood, famiglia, family. Something had crashed around 11, glass shattering, followed by a roar of rage that made the windows rattle. Then terrible silence that was somehow worse than the shouting. Around noon, a man she'd never seen, red-faced, furious, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, had stormed past her in the hallway, nearly knocking her down. He hadn't even glanced at her, hadn't registered her existence. To him, she was furniture. Helen, Edery had stood in his study doorway. His tie was loose, top button undone. His usually immaculate hair was disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. And there was a cut on his cheekbone, blood beginning to dry in a thin line. "You're hurt." The words had escaped before she could stop them. "It's nothing. Let me clean it. Please." He'd hesitated, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't say. Then he'd stepped aside. "Come in." The study had been destroyed. Papers scattered across the floor and desk like snow. A crystal decanter shattered on the Persian rug, expensive whiskey soaking into the wool. Books pulled from shelves, their spines cracked, pages bent. The painting above the fireplace, a beautiful landscape that she'd always admired, hung crooked, like the room itself had been shaken by an earthquake. Helen had retrieved the first aid kit from the attached bathroom and returned to find Edery sitting in his leather chair, head tilted back, eyes closed. This close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading his dark hair. 45, maybe, old enough to have lived several lifetimes compared to her 32 years. This might sting, she'd warned, approaching with an antiseptic wipe. His eyes had opened as she stood between his legs, the only way to reach the cut on his cheekbone. "Do it." Her hands had been steady as she cleaned the wound, despite her racing heart. Despite the way his dark gaze followed her every movement, intense and unblinking. Despite the intimacy of touching his face, of being this close to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes and count his eyelashes. You're good at this. I had a younger brother. Had to patch him up plenty of times growing up. Pat. The gentle question had unlocked something in her chest. He died 3 years ago. Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light. She'd paused at her work, the memory still sharp. Anthony was 23. He was going to be a teacher. I'm sorry. And he'd sounded like he meant it. Like he understood loss intimately. She'd finished with the bandage and should have stepped back. Should have put distance between them. But she couldn't make herself move. Helen. He'd said her name like a prayer, like a confession. Do you know what I really do? What I am? I have an idea. Ideas aren't the same as truth. His hands had moved to rest on her hips, not pulling her closer, just holding, anchoring. I move money for people who can't move it legally. I provide protection for businesses in neighborhoods the police ignore. I solve problems that can't be solved through legitimate channels. And sometimes, his jaw had tightened. Sometimes I do things that would horrify you. You're in the Mafia. That word means different things to different people. But yes, I'm a criminal, Helen. Born into this life, raised for it, trapped in it. This world, he gestured at the destroyed study. This is who I really am. Not the man who reads Baldwin and plays Chopin. Those are just echoes of who I might have been if I'd been born into a different family. I don't believe that. He laughed, bitter, hollow. Then you're a fool. But Helen had seen the desperation in his eyes. The way he was trying to push her away, trying to protect her from himself. Maybe I'm a fool, but I don't think you're just the violence and the deals. I think you're also the man who collects first editions because books can't betray you. The man who plays piano when he thinks no one's listening. The man who asks my opinion like it matters. It does matter. You matter. Which is exactly why you should leave this house and never come back. And if I don't want to leave, something had shifted in his expression. The careful control had slipped, revealing hunger, longing, desperation, fear. All of it warring across his face in the space of a heartbeat. Then he'd stood abruptly, putting distance between them. His hands had dropped from her hips, leaving cold spaces where warmth had been. Go home, Helen. Take the rest of the day off. But, please. The word had sounded like it cost him something vital. Please, just go. She'd left. But as she'd walked out of the mansion, past the unfamiliar guards with their cold eyes and visible weapons, she'd known something fundamental had changed. The line Mrs. Williams had warned her about, it wasn't just blurred anymore. It was shattered. The next morning, Helen had arrived to find the study pristine again, cleaned, repaired, restored to its usual immaculate condition. Edery had been there, back in perfect control, every hair in place, his suit pressed, and his expression unreadable. There's a book for you. He gestured to the desk without meeting her eyes. Garcia Marquez. Love in the Time of Cholera. Helen had picked up the book, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. That's about love that waits. Love that endures despite obstacles. Yes. Finally, his eyes had met hers. It is. And she'd understood. This was his answer. His confession of something he wouldn't say aloud. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was there, in the choice of book, in the way he looked at her, like she was both salvation and damnation. For 3 months, they'd existed in beautiful limbo, discussing books, sharing coffee, circling each other like binary stars, separate but inextricably linked by gravity. Helen learned his rhythms, his moods, the way his jaw tightened when certain phone calls came through. She learned that he took calls from his mother every Sunday morning and spoke in gentle Italian, a different man entirely. That he donated anonymously to 3 schools in the neighborhood where he'd grown up. That he'd once wanted to be a professor of literature before his father died and duty had called. He learned that she hummed while she worked old gospel songs her grandmother had taught her. That she preferred windows open even in winter because she'd grown up in a cramped apartment and loved fresh air. That she'd once wanted to be a teacher like her brother, before life had required other paths, before survival had meant taking whatever work she could find. Neither of them acknowledged what was building between them. Acknowledgement would force a decision neither was ready to make. Then February arrived with its cold snap, and everything began to unravel. Helen started noticing things. A black sedan that appeared behind her car on her drive home. Always 3 cars back, but always there. The same man at her grocery store, the gas station, the library, different clothes, but the same face, the same watchful eyes. She'd mentioned it to Mrs. Williams, who'd gone pale and disappeared into Ettery's study. That night, he'd called her personal phone. Helen had stared at the unknown number, debating whether to answer. "Hello. Helen, it's Ettery. Don't go to work tomorrow. Stay home. Lock your doors and windows." Her heart had stuttered. "What's happening?" "Someone is watching you. Someone who wants to hurt me by hurting the people He'd cut himself off, but the implication hung there. "Just stay home. I'm handling it." "Ettery, please, Helen. Trust me." She'd stayed home for 3 days, climbing the walls of her small apartment, jumping at every sound. On the 4th day, when she couldn't stand the waiting anymore, she'd driven to the mansion and found it transformed into a fortress. Armed men at every entrance. New cameras covering every angle. The atmosphere crackling with tension so thick she could taste it. Ettery had met her in the foyer, his face a mask of fury and relief. "What are you doing here?" "I told you to stay home. I'm not a prisoner, and I'm not leaving you alone in whatever this is. You don't understand what you're risking. Then help me understand." So he had. Over the next hours, sitting in his study with a guard posted outside the door, Ettery had shown her the truth of his world. Not the sanitized version she'd constructed in her mind, but the brutal reality. He'd let her sit in on a meeting where men discussed moving millions in untraceable funds through offshore accounts and shell corporations. Shown her security footage of threats made against him. A brick through a restaurant window with a note attached. A dead rat left on his doorstep. Photos of his car taken from various angles with red X's drawn over them. Explained the delicate balance of power he maintained between 5 families, each with their own territories and interests, each watching for any sign of weakness. He hadn't tried to make himself look better, hadn't softened the edges or made excuses. He'd shown her everything and waited for her to run. She hadn't. "Do you see now?" he'd asked when they were alone, the last of the men gone. "This is my life, Helen. Violence and paranoia and constantly watching my back. I'm not the man in the books. I'm not who you think I am. You're exactly who I think you are. A man trying to be honorable in a dishonorable world." He'd pulled her close then, his forehead resting against hers, his breath warm on her face. "You make me want to be better, to build something legitimate, something clean. You make me want to be the man you see when you look at me instead of the monster my enemies see. Then be that man. It's not that simple. This life, you don't just walk away. It's blood in, blood out." But he'd started trying. Over the following weeks, Helen had watched him turn down deals that would have been profitable but unethical. Refuse partnerships with families known for human trafficking. Start investing in legitimate businesses, a restaurant, a construction company, a tech startup. He'd been transitioning, trying to go legitimate. It had made him look weak to some, treasonous to others. Like he thought he was better than the life that had made him. The threats had increased. More men at the gates. More security cameras. A full detail assigned to Helen. 3 guards who shadowed her everywhere. Stone-faced men who scared away her neighbors and made her feel like she was suffocating. "Just until things settle," Ettery had promised, his eyes haunted. "Just until I know you're safe." Things hadn't settled. They'd exploded. Salvatore Williams had arrived on a cold March afternoon with 6 men and enough weaponry to start a small war. Helen had been in the kitchen, preparing lunch, when she'd heard the commotion at the front door. Raised voices. Ettery's security team trying to block entry. Then Salvatore had been in the foyer, broad-shouldered and silver-haired, radiating controlled violence. "Ettery." His voice had boomed through the mansion like thunder. "We need to talk. Now." "You weren't invited, Sal." Ettery had appeared at the top of the grand staircase, descending slowly, each step measured and deliberate. "Since when do we need invitations between friends?" Salvatore's smile had been all teeth, no warmth. "We're not friends." "No? Then what are we?" "Because I remember when your father and I were close as brothers. Before you decided you were too good for this life. Edery had reached the bottom of the stairs, positioning himself between Salvatore and the rest of the house. Between Salvatore and Helen. My father died in prison. I learned from his mistakes. Did you? Salvatore's gaze had swept the room and landed on Helen, still visible through the kitchen doorway. His eyes had narrowed, calculating. Because from where I'm standing, you're making new ones. Like her, Edery had moved faster than Helen had ever seen, placing himself completely between Salvatore and her, blocking her from view. She's off limits. Is she? Salvatore's grin had widened predatory. The great Edery Orlando has a weakness, after all, and such a pretty one. Tell me, does she know what you really are? What you've done? Get out of my house. Not until you hear my offer. Salvatore had pulled out a folder, tossed it onto the entry table. Partnership. You, me, the Constantino family. We control the entire Eastern Seaboard. Legitimate businesses as cover, real money moving underneath. You want to go clean? Fine. We help you build that facade while the real work continues. The answer is no. You haven't even looked at the numbers. I don't need to. I'm done with that world. I'm building something different. Salvatore's expression had hardened, all pretense of friendliness evaporating. You think you can go legitimate? Clean up the family business and play at being an honest businessman? It doesn't work that way, Edery. You're in this life until you die. The only question is whether you die old and rich in your bed, or young and stupid in the street. I'll take my chances. Will she? Salvatore had looked past Edery directly at Helen, and the threat had been explicit. Clear as day. Because people close to you tend to have accidents. Your father knew that. Your uncle knew that. Now you're going to learn. Edery's entire body had tensed, every muscle coiling like a spring. Touch her, and I will burn your entire organization to the ground. I will destroy everything you've built. I will make you watch everyone you care about suffer before I let you die. Do you understand me, Sal? For a moment, genuine fear had flickered across Salvatore's face. Then he laughed, but it sounded forced. Big words. But you're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. Think about my offer, Edery. You have 1 week to give me an answer. After that, I start making my own decisions about how to handle your transition. Then he'd left, his men following, leaving a poisonous silence in their wake. Edery had turned to Helen, and his face had been pale, drawn, older somehow. Pack a bag. You're leaving. Tonight. Edery. This isn't a discussion, Helen. He knows about you now. He knows you matter to me, which means he'll use you to get what he wants. I won't allow that. I won't let you become leverage. Where would I go? I have a house in Savannah. Secure, off the books. You'll be safe there while I handle this. For how long? As long as it takes. To what? Win this war? Kill Salvatore? That's not a solution. That's just more violence leading to more violence. He'd gripped her shoulders, his fingers digging in almost painfully. I don't have a better answer. All I know is I can't lose you. I can't bear it. You're the only good thing in my life, Helen. The only pure thing I haven't corrupted yet. Please, let me keep you safe. So Helen had gone. That night, driven by Marco, one of Edery's most trusted men who'd been with the family for 20 years, she'd fled Atlanta for a house she'd never seen, running from a danger she couldn't fight. The house in Savannah was beautiful. A 3-story Victorian in a historic district, all gingerbread trim and wraparound porches, painted lady colors and stained glass windows. But it felt like a cage. A beautiful, suffocating cage. Guards had been stationed outside, rotating every 8 hours. She couldn't go anywhere without permission, couldn't call anyone but Edery on a secure, encrypted line. She'd been cut off from her life, suspended in amber. Edery had called every night at 8 p.m. exactly. They'd talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He'd told her about his day, carefully editing out the dangerous parts. The meetings he took, the legitimate businesses he was building. She told him about the books she was reading from the house's extensive library, the garden she was starting to tend in the backyard, the neighbors she watched but couldn't meet. They'd been playing house, pretending they had a normal life. Pretending she was on vacation instead of in hiding. When can I come home? She'd asked one night in early May, unable to keep the loneliness from her voice. There had been a long pause. Soon, amore. Soon. They'd both known it was a lie, but it had been a comforting lie, so they'd let it stand. 6 weeks into her exile, Eddery's call had come at the wrong time. 10 a.m. on a Tuesday instead of his usual 8 p.m. slot. Helen had answered immediately. "Hello. Helen, listen to me very carefully." His voice had been tight, controlled fear underneath. "There's been a development. Salvatore knows where you are." Her blood had turned to ice. "Ow! Betrayal. Someone in my organization gave up your location. I don't know who yet, but they sold you out. You need to leave right now. Marco is outside. He's going to drive you to the airport. There's a ticket waiting for you to New York. When you land, someone will meet you and take you to another safe house. What about you? I'll handle Salvatore. I'll end this. Eddery, please. Don't do something you can't take back. I love you, Helen. Remember that. Whatever happens next, remember that I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my miserable life. You saved me. You made me want to be better. That means everything." Then the line had gone dead. Helen had run for the door, her heart in her throat, but she'd heard the cars before she saw them. 3 black SUVs screeching to a stop in front of the house, tires smoking. Men pouring out like ants from a disturbed hill, weapons drawn, faces covered. Marco had grabbed her arm, his gun already out. Back door. Now. They'd run through the beautiful house, past the library she'd been reading in, past the kitchen where she'd had coffee that morning, past the life she'd been living in suspension. But there had been more men coming from the back. They'd been surrounded. Upstairs, Marco had shouted, returning fire. The sound had been deafening, impossible. Glass had shattered. Wood splintered. Helen had smelled gunpowder and fear. They'd made it to the second floor, barricaded themselves in the master bedroom. Marco had been bleeding from his shoulder, but still functional, still fighting. "There's a panic room," he'd said, pulling aside a bookshelf to reveal a hidden door. "Get in there. No matter what you hear, screaming, begging, silence. Don't come out until Mr. Orlando or I tell you it's safe. Understand? What about you? I'm going to hold them off as long as I can. Give the boss time to get here. Marco, it's been an honor, Miss Myers. You're good for him. You make him human again." Then he'd pushed her into the panic room, a small, reinforced space with water, a phone, supplies, and closed the door. She'd heard the lock engage, then more gunfire, so close it had made her ears ring, shouting in Italian. Marco's voice, defiant, strong, then weaker, then silent. Helen had crouched in that dark space for hours. It could have been 2 hours or 10. Time had lost meaning. The gunfire had eventually stopped. She'd heard voices, footsteps, doors being kicked in, furniture being overturned. Someone had tried the panic room door, but it had held. Then silence. Terrible, complete silence. She'd waited in the dark, her phone showing no signal in the reinforced room. No way to know what was happening. Whether Marco was alive or dead. Whether Eddery was coming or if Salvatore had won. Whether she'd die in this box or walk out into a changed world. It had been full dark. She'd known by the clock on the wall, its luminous hands showing 9 p.m., when she'd heard the door mechanism engage. The locks had disengaged with a series of clicks. Helen had pressed herself into the corner, looking for anything she could use as a weapon. Her hands had closed around a heavy flashlight. The door had opened. Eddery had stood there, backlit by the hallway light, and he'd looked like he'd been through hell. Blood on his shirt. Not his, she prayed. His face haggard, unshaven, eyes haunted and wild. But alive. He was alive. Helen. He'd breathed her name like a prayer answered. She'd flown into his arms, the flashlight clattering to the floor forgotten. He'd held her so tight she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair, his whole body shaking. Marco, she'd asked against his chest, even though she'd known, had known from the silence. In the hospital, critical but stable. He'll live. Eddery had pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. Did they hurt you? Tell me they didn't hurt you. No, I'm okay. Marco got me to the panic room before. Good. That's good. He'd pulled her close again. Salvatore, being dealt with as we speak. The other families, they have rules against targeting civilians, against going after women and children. Attacking you violated every code we have. They've sided with me. Salvatore's organization is being dismantled, his territory divided, his assets seized. And him, Ettery's expression had gone cold, empty, the mask of a killer. He'll never threaten anyone again. Helen should have been horrified, should have recoiled from the casual way he spoke of murder. Instead, she just felt relieved. Safe. Take me home, she'd whispered. To Atlanta? Wherever you are? That's home. They'd left Savannah that night. Just the two of them in his car, his security team following in other vehicles. They hadn't talked much during the drive. There hadn't been much to say. They'd crossed a line they could never uncross. She'd been kidnapped because of him. Men had died because of her. Their worlds had collided in blood and violence, and there was no going back. Back in Atlanta, things had changed. Ettery had moved her into the mansion, not as his housekeeper, but as his partner. No more pretense. No more hiding. Mrs. Williams had raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. The rest of the household had adjusted with remarkable speed. And for a while, a few beautiful months, they'd had peace. Ettery had continued transitioning the business, working 18-hour days to build legitimate enterprises. Real estate developments, restaurant chains, a technology company developing security software. He'd been laundering his reputation, washing away the blood with honest money. They'd fallen into a routine. Mornings in the garden with coffee, Helen pointing out where new flowers should go while Ettery described colors she'd already memorized. Afternoons working, him in his study, taking calls and signing contracts, her helping manage the legitimate holdings, learning the business side. Evenings playing piano together, his hands guiding hers over the keys. Nights wrapped in each other, making up for all the time they'd wasted being careful. "I want to marry you," he told her one evening in August. They'd been on the balcony off his bedroom, looking out over the gardens turned gold by sunset. "You haven't asked me yet." He'd smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face, and gotten down on one knee. From his pocket, he'd pulled a ring, an emerald surrounded by diamonds, vintage, stunning. "This was my grandmother's. She came from Sicily with nothing, built a life here, survived things that would have broken most people. I think she'd like you." He'd looked up at her, and his eyes had been wet. "Helen Myers, will you marry me? Will you take this broken man and help him build something good? Will you be my wife, my partner, my salvation?" Yes. No hesitation. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They'd married in September, a year after Helen had first walked through his gates. A small ceremony in the garden with Mrs. Williams. Marco, recovered from his injuries. A few of Ettery's most trusted men, and a priest who'd known his family for generations and didn't ask questions. Helen had worn a simple white dress. Ettery had cried when he saw her. They'd exchanged vows under an arbor covered in roses, and when he'd kissed her, she'd thought her heart might burst from happiness. They'd had 3 perfect months of being Mr. and Mrs. Orlando. 3 months of building dreams and making plans. 3 months of believing they'd actually escaped the violence. Then December had arrived. They'd been driving home from dinner, a new restaurant Ettery had invested in, celebrating its successful opening. It had been late, maybe 11 p.m., the streets quiet and empty. They'd been talking about holiday plans, whether to spend Christmas in Atlanta or travel to Italy to meet the rest of his family who'd been scandalized by his marriage to an American, a black woman, someone from outside their world. "We'll go to Italy," Helen had decided. "Face them all at once. Get over with." Ettery had laughed. "You're braver than me, amore. I just want them to know I'm not going anywhere. But they need to get used to me. They'll love you." How could they not? The car had run the red light, going at least 60 miles an hour. Ettery had seen it first, had shouted her name, had yanked the wheel hard, tried to avoid impact, but there hadn't been enough time, enough space, enough warning. The car had hit them on the passenger side, Helen's side, with the force of a bomb detonating. She'd remembered the sound of crunching metal, the sound of her own bones breaking, the feeling of being tossed like a rag doll, weightless and powerless. Glass everywhere, glittering like diamonds in the streetlights, each shard a tiny knife. Pain, sharp and blinding and everywhere at once. Then nothing. Blessed, empty nothing. She'd woken in a hospital bed, in the darkness, to Ettery's voice making a promise that would define the rest of their lives. "I will be your eyes." Now, in the hospital bed, Helen squeezed his hand. You can't promise that. You don't know if. I swear it to you. His voice was fierce. On my life, on my honor, on everything I am. If you've lost your sight, then I'll see for you. I'll describe every sunset, every flower, every beautiful thing this world has. You'll see through me, amore, for as long as you need me. Forever. And he'd meant it. Over the following months, as Helen learned to navigate a world of darkness, Edery was there for everything. He'd hired the best specialists in the world, doctors from Switzerland, from Japan, from Johns Hopkins. They'd run tests, tried treatments, offered cautious hope tempered by medical reality. He'd had the mansion retrofitted with every accommodation she might need. Textured pathways through the house. Braille labels on everything. Voice-activated technology. But more than the physical adaptations, he'd given her dignity. He'd learned Braille so he could teach her, sitting for hours while she struggled with the dots, never showing impatience. He'd insisted she continue managing his businesses. They'd just find new methods. Screen readers. Assistants who could be her eyes for documents. Video calls where she participated fully even though she couldn't see the other participants. But most importantly, he described everything. The way morning light hit the garden, turning the fountain into liquid gold. The expression on Mrs. Williams' face when she tried a new recipe and it worked perfectly. The color of the sky during thunderstorms, purple and green and angry. The way snow looked on the bare tree branches in the rare Atlanta winter storm. Helen learned to see the world through his words, his voice becoming her vision. His descriptions were so detailed, so precise that she could almost see. The crimson of roses wasn't just red. It was the color of wine held up to sunlight, deep and rich with hints of purple at the edges. The garden wasn't just pretty. It was a symphony of textures and colors, the yellow roses bright as lemons against the dark green leaves that look almost black in shadow. "You're incredible," he'd say when she successfully navigated from bedroom to kitchen independently, counting steps and using the textured pathways. "Look at you. I can't look at anything," she'd remind him dryly. "You know what I mean. You're so strong, Helen. Stronger than anyone I've ever known." 6 months after the accident, they'd received news. The police had found the driver who'd hit them. Dead in an apartment in Decatur, apparent suicide, but with connections to what remained of Salvatore's organization. A final act of revenge from a dying enterprise. "What will you do?" Helen had asked, sitting across from Edery in his study. "What do you want me to do?" She'd thought about it carefully. The old Helen, the one who'd just been a housekeeper, naive about this world, might have wanted vengeance, might have demanded blood for blood. But she'd learned that vengeance was just another form of darkness. It consumed everything it touched. "Let it go," she'd said finally. "We're building something new, something clean. Don't let them pull you back into the old ways. Don't let them win by making you into what they expected you to be. He took your sight, Helen. He took your eyes from you." "No." She'd reached across the desk, finding his hand with practiced ease. "He took my eyes, my sight, the way I see the world, the way I see you, the way I see us, and what we're building, that's still here. That's still mine. That's something no one can take. Don't let him take anything else from us. Don't let him turn you back into the man you were before we met." She'd heard him move, felt him come around the desk. Then he'd been kneeling before her chair, his head in her lap. "How did I get so lucky? How did I deserve you? We both got lucky. We found each other when neither of us was looking." A year after the accident, doctors had approached them with a new option. An experimental surgery developed in Germany, using stem cells and nerve regeneration techniques. Risky, with a small chance, maybe 20%, of restoring some vision. Not perfect sight, but something. "Do you want to try?" Edery had asked, sitting beside her on their bed. Helen had thought about it. She'd adjusted to blindness, had learned to navigate, to work, to live fully. She was happy, or as happy as she could be. "I don't know. What if the surgery doesn't work and I've gotten my hopes up for nothing? What if I've made peace with this and then I lose that peace? What if it does work? What if you could see again, even a little? Would you love me less if I could see? If I didn't need you to be my eyes anymore?" He'd laughed, genuine and warm. "Amore, I'll always need to be your eyes. Even if you see perfectly, you'll still need me to point out what matters. Like how beautiful you are every morning, how strong you are every day, how miraculous it is that you chose me. So Helen had tried the surgery. She'd gone under anesthesia in a Munich hospital with Edery holding her hand until the last possible moment. When she'd woken up and the bandages had come off days later, the world had swum into blurry, imperfect focus. Not perfect, not like it had been before, but present, real, there. And the first thing she'd seen clearly was Edery's face. He'd been crying. This man who'd faced down killers without flinching, who'd built an empire on strength and fear, who'd survived assassination attempts and gang wars. He was crying as he looked at her. "Can you see me?" His voice had been thick with emotion. Yes. Her own tears had been falling, blurring her vision further. "I can see you." And what she'd seen was transformation. A man who'd been hard edges and shadows, now softened by light and love. Not perfect, not without scars, literal ones from fights and figurative ones from his life, but trying, always trying to be better. Now, 2 years after that first hospital awakening, they were still in Atlanta. Still in a mansion that had gone from workplace to prison to home. Edery had successfully transitioned most of the Orlando operations to legitimate businesses. The old family interests had been sold off, divided up, handed over to others. They still had security. Some threats never fully disappeared when you'd lived the life Edery had lived. But they also had peace. A real life. Helen's sight remained imperfect. She had blind spots, limited peripheral vision, trouble with depth perception. But she could see enough. Enough to watch sunrises with Edery on their balcony, his arm around her shoulders. Enough to read with the help of large print books and good lighting. Enough to see his face when he told her he loved her, to catch the softness in his expression when he thought she wasn't looking. And when she couldn't see something clearly, he was there, describing it, filling in the gaps, being her eyes just like he'd promised. Not because she was helpless, but because they were partners. Because they'd saved each other, and they continued to save each other every single day. One evening in late spring, they sat in the library where it had all begun, where he'd first handed her a book and changed the trajectory of both their lives. Helen was reading, a new translation of Neruda's love poems, while Edery played softly on the piano. Chopin, always Chopin. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly, lowering her book. "Choosing me? This life? Walking away from everything you knew?" The music stopped. She heard him cross the room, felt him kneel before her chair. His hands found hers with practiced ease. "Regret you?" His voice was incredulous. "Helen, you saved me. From myself. From the darkness I was drowning in. From becoming the monster everyone expected me to be. You showed me another way to live. I lost my sight because of you. Because someone wanted to hurt you. And I lost my way before I found you. We saved each other, amore. I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that salvation." She touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines she'd memorized. The scar on his cheekbone from that December fight. The crow's feet around his eyes from years of squinting and suspicion. The strong jaw that could be so hard but softened when he looked at her. "I love you," she said simply. "Even with everything. Maybe because of everything. I love you. Always. Until my last breath." He guided her hand to his chest, over his heart. "Feel that. That beats because of you. For you. Everything I am, everything I'm becoming. It's because you saw something in me worth saving. You were always worth saving. You just didn't know it. Maybe, but I didn't believe it until you." Helen pulled him up into her arms, and they stayed like that as evening darkened to night. Two people who'd found each other across an impossible divide. A housekeeper and a criminal. A blind woman and the man who'd sworn to be her eyes. A love story that shouldn't have worked, but it did. Against all odds, against all logic, against everything that should have kept them apart. It worked. Because love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about coming from the same world or having the same advantages. It was about seeing each other truly, not just with eyes, but with hearts. It was about choosing each other every day, even when the choice was hard. Helen had lost her physical sight, but she'd gained something more valuable. the ability to see people for who they truly were, not just who they appear to be. She saw Edery, not the Mafia boss, not the dangerous man, but the soul beneath. The man who'd wanted to be a professor, who played Chopin when he thought no one was listening, who'd learned to be gentle in a world that rewarded brutality. And he saw her, not the housekeeper, not the victim, but the warrior, the woman who'd chosen to stay when she could have run, who'd shown him that strength came in many forms, who'd loved him not despite his darkness, but through it, helping him find his way to light. They were an impossible pair, a love story that defied every expectation. But sometimes the most impossible things were the most worth fighting for. And they would keep fighting, keep choosing each other, keep building their imperfect, beautiful life together. One day at a time, one moment at a time, forever. And that's how a housekeeper and a mafia boss built something beautiful from the ashes of violence. If you made it this far, you just experienced a story about seeing beyond the surface, about love that transforms, about two people who saved each other when the world said they shouldn't even exist in the same space. And I need to know, did you see the depth of their connection coming? Did Helen and Edery's journey give you chills? What was your favorite moment? Tell me in the comments right now. Where are you watching from? What moment hit you hardest? Did you cry when Helen woke up blind, or when Edery promised to be her eyes? And if this story resonated with you, if it made you believe in impossible love, if it reminded you that transformation is possible even in the darkest circumstances, you need to subscribe, because next week's story goes even deeper into the world where danger and devotion collide. Hit that like button right now. It costs you nothing, but helps me massively. And share this with someone who loves epic romance that defies the odds. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, remember, sometimes the person who becomes your everything is the one you least expected. And true sight has nothing to do with eyes. It's about seeing with your heart, your soul, your entire being. The best love stories aren't about perfect people in perfect circumstances. They're about imperfect people choosing each other perfectly. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing in love that transforms. See you next time.